Thanks, Glenn. So the format for this afternoon, and do bear with us, I think if you are able to stay throughout the session, it will all evolve and make sense by the end. But we're going to look at the existential business case for net positive hospitality. We're lucky to have Charlotte and Pascal here to show us a very recent report on using strategic foresight and horizon scanning to understand what lies ahead for hospitality and tourism in this rapidly changing world. Then we're going to collectively discover our own vision for net positive 2030. And actually, how do we all as leaders show up in order to get there? And then we're going to have a showcase by Red Sea Global before we wrap up. So can I first of all ask you all, I'm going to go back. Have you got your phones? I'd love you to scan this QR code on the right, because we're going to be asking a few questions at the beginning and at the end of the session on Slido. So if you can all tap this QR code, it should pop up on your phone screen. And as soon as I hit the question slides, you'll be able to put in your answers on Slido. So thank you so much for playing with us. Okay, so you're going to have to look at your phones for this because we had some tech issues, so I've got 3 devices I'm managing right now. So the first question we're going to ask you is, how knowledgeable do you feel right now about true sustainability and its associated socio-economic risks and opportunities? We're going to ask you to give us a score of 1 to 10. And this is not a competition. We want you to be radically honest with us today. If it's a 1, that's totally fine. What we hope is it goes up from there at the end. But if it's a 10, we'll get you on stage.
Let me revise.
Martin wants to be on the stage. Wait, Martin, you're coming up. All right, the next question is, how confident are you right now in articulating net positive hospitality and its differentiation to sustainable hospitality? Again, radical honesty today. 1 to 10. Next question. Ooh, we've got some 4s and some 7s on that one. I get to see the answers here. Sorry that you can't. Next question is, to what extent do you believe your brand currently has an ambition to become a net positive brand? Not at all, not on anyone's radar, or are you already on the path? Wow. We have a lot of top scores here. This is very impressive. We'll be out of a job. And the next question, to what extent do you believe in a strategic business opportunity for your company to engage with a pathway to net positive? 1 to 10. It's not important today, you've got other things going on, or you understand the radical imperative of net positive. High end of the score, fantastic. We too, that's why we're all here. And finally, right now, to what extent do you personally feel equipped to influence and lead your company towards net positive? Sorry, now you have it. We all feel like we're well equipped in this room. Some less so, that's fantastic. Thank you all very much for playing with us. Now we're going to move into the fundamental context of today. And you can put your phones down now, but I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, but we're going to do a show of hands this time. I don't know if anyone else has asked you this today, but how happy do you feel right now? I'm going to ask anyone less than a 5 happy right now. Hands up. That's great. What about a 5 to a 7 happy right now that you feel? 5 to 7? Okay. Can do better. And an 8 plus. Awesome. Okay. Why do I ask you that? Well, the World Happiness Index report came out just last month. And it shows every year how happy a nation is. And some Western countries really dropped in their happiness this year compared with the last couple of years. But also China reduced its happiness. The US dropped. I'm afraid to say Saudi Arabia dropped just 3 points, but it is still number 34 happy country in the world, so that's excellent. But consistently, it's the Nordic countries who are the winners in happiness, and this is attributed to the level of social welfare that's in their countries, strong community interactions, and a robust connection with nature. The predictors of happiness are also about sharing meals with other people. In the US, in 2023, they did a survey, and a quarter of the population dine alone. And this is a 53% increase to 20 years ago. Another predictor of happiness is how kind we perceive our fellow communities to be to us, and how welcoming we feel one another is. Next question. How important do you think that happiness of individuals is in the hospitality experience? Hands up if you think that it is significantly important to have your customers, your staff, your local businesses happy as people for a good experience. Pretty much everyone, not everyone. What about kindness? How important is kindness as part of the hospitality experience between your guests, your staff, your everyone? Okay, final show of hands. Hands up if your company measures and officially reports on the levels of kindness and happiness at your brand. Nobody. One. Okay. But we just discovered that it is actually really important. And so should we be focusing on a very small number of metrics that we're being asked to disclose on if we're really to figure out how good we're operating on the ground? Do we need to think a bit more broadly than that? And these are really important reflections as we explore the meaning and the opportunities for net positive as we go through this afternoon. And what's important is also to think about how we actually define that. How can we visualize that net positive end game in order to understand how we're going to get there? And that's going to bring me on to this next term. Sustainability. Does anyone want to have a bash? We've got a roving mic, if you're not shy, at defining the term in one line of sustainability. What do we mean? How do we articulate what we mean by sustainability? Anyone want to put their hand up? Have a go. Quick fire round. There's no right or wrong here. It's not a, again, anyone? Yeah, someone there behind you, smile?
You
Do no harm.
Do no harm. Brilliant. A great importance of sustainability. Anyone else have another go? Richard?
Looking after your staff, so stewardship.
Stewardship. Lovely. Great. Anyone else? I mean, oh, yeah?
Wellness.
Wellness. Nice. There's many different words and phrases that have come up. There's probably more in your head for those of you who are less wanting to go on the loudspeaker. But the point is, it's difficult, right? And yet we're all talking about sustainability for years. But if we can't actually define it, that one official one-line definition is it means operating in a way that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But of course, within that come all these other concepts, circularity, all these other efforts that people are going to, that you're reporting on, you're disclosing on. And this is why this is very important today, that we're going to come onto an articulation exercise. But how do we know if we're being sustainable? Famous management quote by the guru, Peter Drucker, said that you can only manage what you measure, but he actually had a second part to this phrase that is commonly not published. He didn't mean that this is it. Because quantitative metrics and data are really important. But there are additional ways of understanding how good or less good your company is operating that are more qualitatively measured. And it can be complex and complicated to get that data qualitatively, of course. But it is actually possible to measure everything. It's just about understanding what questions to ask of which people and how to manage the answers. And so it is, as Peter Drucker actually said, this combination of quantitative and qualitative insights that give the most effective management approach, because we need to have that qualitative context and depth and intuition. And so That is how we actually look at what success is. So the data is needed to guide and inform, and that can start with quantitative metrics for sure, but it mustn't be the only thing that dictates them. So it's this understanding of the broader context that is always critical and is mostly missing in all types of organizations. So as leaders, if we're going to find our way forward to actually get to where we need to be by 2030 and beyond, to have resilient, successful companies with high potential and high levels of resilience, we must make sure that we are remaining constantly curious and not assuming that we have all the answers today, because we don't. We must practice humility to actually enable us to recognize that there is always more to learn, because the world is changing around us so fast. And we must also understand that it is not just for us as the leaders to define and to dictate how we get there, but it's about listening deeply to our stakeholders and to those we're engaging with and we're depending upon, who can contribute into this vision and help us find a way forward. As Glenn said earlier, this has got to be a two-way flow, and we need to empower everybody to participate if we're to succeed. So the Alliance has a pathway to net positive, and the idea here is to provide clarity and a step-by-step approach to help us navigate this complexity and understand what to do next, why it's important to do it, and how. And this, of course, is an evolving piece of work, because the world is evolving fast. So that is our role, to help support our members to be able to navigate this pathway and to do this together, because we are also always learning from everyone around us. And in order to navigate this landscape of chaos, which has become the new normal, which you're shortly going to hear about from Charlotte and Pascal, we really do need to have this collective intelligence. And that is why we're so thrilled to have you all in the room to help think through, really articulating confidently by the time we all leave this room, how we vision, what is our own vision for our company to get to where we wanted to get to, by what time frame, and how do we bring that to life, and how as leaders are we supposed to show up with perhaps some new frameworks that you'll be guided through today to step away and go and do just that. So we know today that we are all facing a never-ending list of priorities, and it can be hard for us to even talk about sustainability, which is often seen as a side thing that goes into our reports and is compliance. And we're just about to show you that it is not. We've had recessions, we have the impacts of climate change that are already impacting bottom lines, we have the loss of nature and pandemics, and it keeps coming thick and fast. Today we are faced by a myriad of interconnected forces, and we understand that with the misinformation, technology disruptions, ecological breakdown, geopolitical tensions, this is all actually impacting the way we're working, and the health of our own friends, family, companies, and the health of the markets and climate change impacts are inextricably linked. So we cannot ignore one when we need to get forward. And what we need to be able to do as leaders is to understand actually the full context of how this planet works today. I would like to have another show of hands. Hands up if this diagram is familiar to you and if you've heard of the planetary boundaries. Okay, one or two, not many. Then I'm very happy that we get to bring this to you today. Because the world's leading scientists several years ago connected all the different interdisciplinary sciences to come together to understand how this planet works. And there are 9 key systems on this planet that mean that Earth can self-regulate within that context and enable us to safely exist. Of those 9 planetary boundaries, 6 have already breached beyond what we call a safe operating level. So we've gone beyond those, that's a tipping point. And that is our climate change, it's run away. Some of these boundaries we can reverse, but some have gone too far. However, that green, safe operating space for us all and our companies and our global economy is what we need to maintain. So we need to bring back those extent of those red lines as close as we can to that green. That is the whole fundamental point of why we're being asked to report and disclose on the different activities that we are doing across our economic value chains that contribute to these planetary boundaries, being safe or unsafe and unstable. The 9 planetary boundaries are the state of our climate, the state of our nature, the way we use our land, the state of our oceans, one of the most critical habitats for all of us to be here right now, the state of our soils, freshwater availability, pollution, and so on. So the first one is climate change. We're going to do a quick fire rapid run through. And we know fundamentally it's very simple. We have gases being released into the atmosphere, warming up our planet. And this is causing our economy great cost. 10% increase in climate vulnerability, which is, we're way there, can drop 10% of our tourism revenue by GDP. And the animals and people walking around consume and emit carbon, but it's our forests and our plants and our oceans that absorb them. And these are called carbon sinks. So it's our forests, our mangroves, our seagrass, and all the creatures who live in them. The bigger the animal, the greater the carbon storage. And very simply, we've unlocked and displaced that carbon that's been stored safely underground for millennia, and we have reduced Earth's capacity to reabsorb it. And that's one of the reasons we're where we are today. And our global food system, contributing hugely into the hospitality value chain, causes over a quarter of global emissions when it's non-regenerative. 16% from global transport, but overall it's our energy and the way we consume that contributes greatest to the emissions of carbon. Next, show of hands. You're getting the gist here. We like to play with everyone. Of these three activities, use of our internet, bottom tool fishing, or civil global aviation, which do you think is contributing the greatest amount of carbon emissions into our atmosphere? Hands up if you think it's the internet. Some, 7, 8. Bottom tool fishing? Couple? Global aviation? Another 3. The answer is actually the internet. So 3.7% of our global emissions come from our use of the internet. And it's really important to remember that whilst it's non-physical, the hidden infrastructure that we depend upon to run our companies is actually something that we maybe are not tackling that we could. Global hospitality contributes around 3% to global emissions. 1% comes from direct operations on the ground. And you've probably heard that 1.5 degrees is the limit that we must not reach by 2100 since pre-industrial times if we are to hold those planetary boundaries within that green safe limit. And 2024 was the first time when we exceeded 1.5 degrees over a 12-month period. So we have to all radically play our part to draw down that carbon that we continue to emit. And it is critical as leaders that we don't just look at the carbon emissions, because it is not, as you've seen, the only factor that impacts our economic bottom line. The state of nature, we've lost 70% of our species just in the last 50 years. And given that $600 billion of tourism revenue comes from nature tourism, we all need to play our part to make sure that we don't lose more and we get back what we can. Since 2022, man-made materials outweigh all living life on this planet. And we continue to use our natural resources earlier and earlier each year. And we are currently using our planet's resources 1.75 times what Earth can naturally reproduce. And every country has its own day of what we call overshoot, when we've gone over the ability of that part of the world to regenerate natural resources. USA has already gone. That was in March for the whole of this year, 26. Saudi Arabia, April the 8th. China is coming next week. And back in 1970, there was a report done that predicted and modeled the continuation of business as usual, even back then, would peak around now and drop our ability to manage our natural resources, which we depend upon. And this, if you haven't read the book, Limits to Growth, is understanding for us as leaders that we cannot continue consuming resources in this closed system faster than Earth can regenerate them, because we hit all these interconnected geopolitical issues that we're facing today. Back to the planetary boundaries before we wrap up. Over half our land on this planet has been transformed by us, which reduces its natural resilience, because nature knows how to hold resilience. Our oceans, the biggest carbon sink on this planet, producing nearly 80% of the oxygen we breathe, and absorbing up to 90% of the excess heat that we're emitting out, are at great risk. And that absorption of that heat is causing untold consequences beneath the surface that we cannot see unless you're diving in the Red Sea here. And coral reef tourism is valued at $36 billion a year. If we continue business as usual, 3.5 degrees by 2100, there will be no coral reefs left on this planet by 2100. But you all will be aware, if you're living here and by the sea and eco tourism at the coast, that this is something that brings our tourists, but that bleaching happen is going to stop people coming to those destinations. So we need to act fast. 3% of water on this planet is fresh enough for us to consume. Only 1% of that today remains clean enough for consumption. So we have to figure out how to stop wasting and polluting that fresh water. And that's not the only thing we waste. Humans are the only species that cause waste on this planet. And this costs companies globally around $100 billion a year to manage their waste. 99% of what we buy, particularly in the West, is discarded within 6 months. So we really need to rethink how we're operating our lives. So why does this all matter? Well, it matters for finance, business, and for our own future. Here we have 2025's global risks by the World Economic Forum. And you'll see that over the next 10 years, 5 of those top 10 global risks are environmental. And to the right, you see the interconnections between those risks. So we can see that loss of biodiversity and nature, climate change impacts cause instability from politics, but also social migration, and cause a whole heap of interconnected problems. These are not things that can be viewed in isolation. Everything is interdependent here. And we're in this room because this is now our job too. This is not for a chief sustainability officer alone. It is for all of us and our employees and our customers to participate to solve these challenges that we face. The cost of living is increasing dramatically because the cost of food production is growing as we hit these impacts, and the world is becoming uninsurable. And a Booking.com report showed that about 75% of travelers in 2023 felt that the rising cost of pricing affected their decisions on traveling away from home. So that's huge for us. And the financial directors from global hospitality brands in 2024, a report done by EY, showed that they felt that it was actually the lack of labor supply due to some of these issues that is really causing the greatest harm on our bottom line. Financial cost of inaction on climate change alone can cost 20% of GDP over the next 50 years. And these issues actually coming back is not just that direct impact, which is costing us the money, but it is those losses in productivity from supply chain disruptions and the collapse of different industries that we depend upon, because this industry is feeding in multiple different sectors with our food supply chains and our energy and so on. And those harms to productivity cost the US 6 times more than those direct climate impacts. So we really need to be broadening our horizon and having a 360-degree risk lens, which requires great foresight, horizon scanning, and scenario planning. In Saudi Arabia, we understand the catastrophic impacts of extreme heat that happened here last year. But also, a lot of the hospitality industry here is depending on those marine ecosystems. But also, it's hugely costly to be able to mitigate and adapt. But as Glenn said earlier, what is phenomenal to see here, and it is my first time visiting this country, the insane opportunity that is already being accelerated by Saudi Arabia. So we have, thank heaven, Saudi Vision 2030 with the Green Initiative. 50% of renewable energy is set to be part of the economy here by 2030. There's a huge circular economy focus to reduce that waste and think about how we can look to nature to do things better. And Saudi just launched the biggest ever green bond at $1.5 billion. So we're really seeing that there's a huge economic opportunity to tackle these issues here. So, finalizing this part, we understand that there is great opportunity in mitigating the risk in the face of these polycrises, as it is called. So to mitigate impacts from climate, from nature loss, and the issues with our inequality of social human capital, means that we need to go above and beyond and fully restore beyond where we found them, those ecosystems, invest heavily in community resilience and human capital, and to embed those circular principles. As we said, Red Sea Global are really taking this seriously, and we look forward to hearing from Martin later about how they are just doing this. But I know that many other conversations I've had today show brands are really starting to focus on these issues, because we have to protect our social license to operate. This is critical. We have to bring shared value with the people we depend upon, and not just share their spaces. We need to build trust with our communities and co-invest in well-being, happiness, kindness, and not just that regulatory compliance. And Al-Ula, as I've been hearing, is really demonstrating this, where on site, the business is not just welcomed, it is celebrated, because of the way that cultural heritage is being really promoted. And that is also what our guests are looking for. We need to differentiate our brand positioning all the time, and these opportunities provide a great array of actions that can help us do this, because travelers are increasingly seeking purposeful, place-based experiences, and that commands a premium pricing and builds loyalty. So we really want that authentic differentiation, and that can only be found by the very specific place in which you operate. Tap into it. Six Senses, another experience that is really bringing this to life. And we heard earlier from Curtin on the stage talking about the power of storytelling and thinking about regeneration. And this is what guests want. They want storytelling. This is an easy way for all of us to bring the reality of our efforts to life. And we don't have to be there yet, but we need to be able to communicate how we're going to get there and why we believe it's important. Operational efficiency and resilience. This is also a no-brainer opportunity. So I've spoken to a few people here again last night who were sharing that they have seen the bottom line improve already by the accelerated efficiency of the way they're able to operate, using nature as a design center. We've just got to see things differently and build that self-reliance, that decentralization, so that we're not going to be facing resource scarcity. And Cinderella Island, another amazing example of how those biocentric biospheres are being embraced, looking at circular water and waste systems, so that we only have a continual flow of energy and not continual outputs that we have to then manage. Talent attraction retention on this industry, high turnover, difficult to attract talent. This is increasingly something that people are looking for, and you can hold people through that purpose, through that story of why you choose to invest in the people throughout your brand. Again, Habitat Saluda, really prioritizing the recruitment and training locally, but again, I've heard so many people talking about how they're really now starting to understand the vital importance of that. And this also increases that guest experience and builds that long-term thriving opportunity. So, the ROI on thinking beyond sustainability means embracing and investing in climate, nature, and social stability buffers. It building brand loyalty by being premium and offering opportunities that align with people's values, being circular, efficient with your resources, and really embracing those community partnerships. Build that purpose-driven culture. And all of this is also of increasing importance to the investors. So this all feeds into your ESG metrics so that you are going to be securing future-proof financial flows. So what we're talking about today is no longer a niche ideal. It's a business imperative in an age of rapid transformation. Regenerative economics, and we'll come into that in our last session, enables hospitality businesses and the value chains to thrive by ensuring we restore and not deplete the social and ecological systems we fundamentally depend upon. So, for the next sort of few minutes, I'm going to invite you all to find your brochures on the table. And you will find a first deconstruction here. So we'd like you to, first of all, introduce yourself to your neighbor and find out why they came to this session. And then I would like to give you sort of 5-6 minutes to work through these questions. What are the risks of inaction on these existential threats? What are effective and impactful methods and models of economic cooperation? And how can we measure the business value and success in net positive hospitality? So just a few minutes to just think through, have a chat on your table, jot some notes down, because we really want to be able to take away the way you're feeling and embracing these thoughts once you leave the room.